talking about Boris Johnson, of course, and we're talking about Donald Trump, both of whom are facing music, it would seem, at this moment. Music which many people perhaps had begun to fear would never be heard. The former American president has been charged over his handling of top secret documents, classified documents, some of them top secret, the unauthorized retention of classified files. The full charge is not yet public, but it's the second indictment of Mr. Trump and the first ever federal indictment of a former president. The first ever federal indictment of a former president. And back in Blighty, Boris Johnson is considering whether to challenge the findings of an inquiry into whether he lied over Partygate. And even there, which is the Daily Mail's opening paragraph, one needs to clarify slightly the actual facts, of course, because he definitely misled Parliament. We know that for a fact. The investigation, the inquiry, is looking at whether he did so knowingly. And remember, this is a man who attended a party without realising it was a party. So it may sound silly to you that the defence will be that I did do it, but I didn't realise I was doing it. I wouldn't count any particular chickens there, although the front page of the Telegraph is interesting. Johnson may be spared by-election. So that would sort of put it into the categories of, well, it's good news. Do you know why it's good news? Because the committee has chosen to ignore the most recent referrals to the police for further alleged lockdown breaches. I suppose the parameters of their investigation have to be imposed somewhere, and they've taken the view, the Select Committee, looking into Boris Johnson, the Privileges Committee, looking into Partygate, as it's called, have had to draw a line and just focus on what they were charged with focusing on when the investigation was instituted. They can't then add to it the latest examples of him being referred to police for further alleged lockdown breaches. They describe, the Telegraph that is, which is up for sale actually if you've got about 500 million quid going spare, give or take. They describe speculation that he may avoid a lengthy suspension. Hopes of avoiding a long sanction. If he gets suspended for 10 days or more than 10 days, then there could be a by-election. If it is lower than that, then I don't think there is a vote upon whether or not a by-election could be triggered. I don't know how that vote would go. But these are, and this is the point now that you have to just bear with me for a moment on, because I'm going to make a slightly odd admission to you in a minute. This is the point at which you have to marvel at the sheer scale and scope of how far we have fallen, how far these two democracies have fallen in the last 6 or 7 years. You just have to pause for a moment and focus on that. You've got the first ever indictment, federal indictment of an American president, the second indictment in total, for essentially treating top secret documents, which contain God knows what, could contain anything, essentially keeping them in his holiday home or whatever you're going to call Mar-a-Lago. It's quite incredible to focus upon that. And then you've got a former British Prime Minister whose allies, cheerleaders and client journalists will celebrate if his situation is not so dire that he becomes the first former Prime Minister ever to be suspended from Parliament. In two astonishing scenarios. And here's the slightly odd admission. I'm not feeling it like I used to. Now, some days when I come on air, I tell you things that are a bit private, just about where I'm sitting in terms of emotional responses to stories or intellectual responses to stories. Sometimes by the time I finish my introduction, like by the time I've stopped saying good morning to you, I've changed. I've almost talked myself out of a position of lethargy or talked myself out of a position of passion. But with these two men, I don't understand why the righteous fury I have felt about both of them for the best part of a decade is not there today. Maybe it will come storming back if these investigations deliver swingeing and damning verdicts. Maybe it will come storming back if they don't. But the question of why does it still matter is one that I am struggling to answer. And I know that you're going to be able to help me. In a way, I'm afraid today's first hour is for people who've spent the last few years in a state of despair. For people who, it's not an hour for people who've loved it all because it upsets all the right people when the foundation stones of Western democracy are hammered and chipped away at by disgusting individuals and their disgusting supporters. It's not a day for that. I promise you'll have another moment in the sun before the year is out. But this is about those of us who are supremely unsurprised by what we see before us today. The utterly damning indictment of Donald Trump and the utterly shameful situation in which Boris Johnson finds himself. Now, I know the obvious answer to the question of why does it still matter is that they could still both regain power. But even there, I've got these weird seeds of skepticism, particularly with Trump, because if Trump was found, as he said himself at the very beginning, if he said at the very beginning that I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. The point is, if Donald Trump is found to have in his possession nuclear codes, things for which Vladimir Putin would pay a king's ransom, if he's found to have in his possession the single most damning evidence imaginable, then I don't think it would budge a single person. If for example, you're thinking of texting me or ringing me now to say, what about Joe Biden's garage? Then you're never going to change, are you? Whether you're British or American, you're never, ever going to accept that a federal investigation trumps everything that has gone before. It's incredible because, of course, the other thing you have to play into the mix with Trump is the fact that Fox News, hugely influential broadcast platform in America, inflated and broadcast his lies about losing the last election. I mean, the breach of truth, never mind trust, the simple breach of truth is absolutely phenomenal. But still, there will be people queuing up to support or defend him or claim that, in the same way. Do you remember it was Hillary's emails when the first elements of evidence of his depravity were disclosed? We were all supposed to be focusing on. No one really knew why. That these people just need something to distract themselves with, never mind other people. And then we come back to Britain. We come back to Boris Johnson and the fact that he was hounded out of office by his own party as a consequence of lie after lie after lie after lie. And he's not only now trying to wriggle off the hook of telling lies by claiming that when he told lies he didn't realise they were lies, and he's got a history of getting away with that sort of thing throughout his entire life, of course, and if not getting away with it, then just sitting still until everyone else has forgotten and moved on to something else. He's also trying to get an honours list put through. Imagine that. I mean, in what other world would you be able to nominate people for peerages after being deposed from your position in disgrace? It's incredible, right? But I don't understand why. That's a good suggestion. You feel like it's too late, James. The damage has already been done. Do you know, I wonder if that's it. I want you to stiffen my resolve this morning. I want you to tell me not only why you still care, but also, crucially, why everybody else should as well. I worry that even perhaps those of us who've been front and centre on these two men's utter unsuitability for high office for years now have reached the point where it feels as if there's no point pointing it out. It's a little bit like Brexit, isn't it? We had to bring that in at some point. It's a little bit like Brexit. If you're not going to admit now that it was all a stupid mistake, visited upon an undeserving country by charlatans, liars and racists. If you're not going to admit that now, then you probably never will. So what is the point? I was invited onto Question Time next week, where they're having an audience entirely consisting of people who voted for Brexit. And I just thought, what? I hope I'm wrong. I'll watch it with interest. But I just found myself thinking, what a ridiculous exercise that is. Why the hell, even now, would you be treating these arguments as if they're equal and opposite, as if there's an equivalence between these two positions? I can just about understand it why you did it in the run-up to Brexit, why you would treat Nigel Farage as being an equal and opposite authority to Barack Obama, say. But now, when the chickens have come home to roost, you're still going to have a conversation about it in a fashion that treats both sides as somehow equal. And that's what I mean about it feeling all a little bit pointless. It's as if the victory of feelings over facts, even as the heroes of that movement, the two heroes of prioritising feelings over facts, Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, find themselves in different degrees of disgrace this morning. It's as if perhaps they are. It is too late. So are you feeling like me, or are your fires of righteous indignation still burning? Why must we remember that this stuff still matters. 0345 6060 973. But what has happened intrigues me as well, because I've said to you a million times, I've never quite nailed it down. You can use the analogy of boiling a frog, and I've used it a lot. But I prefer the A to Z explanation. So if Z happened tomorrow, we would all be utterly outraged. There'd be shock and awe. It would be apocalyptic if Z happened tomorrow. But if Z happened after 25 previous stages, from A to Y, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, I won't go on. You know the rest. You've heard this song before. Then that incremental change means that something delivered in one fell swoop would cause untold outrage. But if it happens very, very gently, incrementally, gradually, then suddenly you're just in Z. You're just in this world. So a president federally indicted for stealing top secret documents, a prime minister facing potential suspension for lying through his teeth and then lying about lying. If they both get off, it's a bit like Prince Harry's legal case. The evidence of wrongdoing is irresistible. It comes down to legal niceties and technicalities. These two men, in situations that if I had sat here in 2016 and talked to you about a federally indicted president of the United States of America stealing top secret documents and lying about it, never mind lying about an actual election result, still lying now, years after the event, years after seeing his armed supporters seek to storm the Capitol, calling for the blood of his own vice president. And then the British equivalent, the pound shop, the Poundland equivalent, Boris Johnson over here, just riding roughshod over the most basic requirements of decency and standards. And it's just breathtaking. If I'd said to you in 2016, you're never going to guess what's just happened, and then I'd just relayed 2, 3, 4 of those stories to you, you wouldn't have believed me. You wouldn't have believed me. But here we are, looking at it square in the face. Looking at it square in the face. It may have been a mistake to knit the two together. Perhaps we should have gone in just on Boris Johnson or just on Donald Trump. But the question I have for you this morning, specific to those two men, is why does it still matter?
It's important because the children are watching. I do not want my son growing up in a world where decent people see world leaders behaving in such a disgraceful manner and just throw up their hands and say, oh, well, stuff happens. It's just the way it is. And there's nothing we can do about it. No.
That's an interesting point.
It's unacceptable.
But so then you never stop caring because that message, that lesson that young people receive is of such paramount importance.
Absolutely.
James, good morning. I'd like to give you some of my anger. I think you need a bit this morning.
I'm never normally short of anger, Peter, but I do on this occasion feel grateful for the offer.
I feel it matters, James, hugely because of the amount of damage that both men have done to their respective systems. In order for that damage to be unpicked, at least to some degree, and I think it's a very difficult job to unpick damage, I think there has to be a focal point, something solid that incoming parties can actually point to and rally around.
Yes.
And say, for these reasons, we now have to take this step.